She couldn't take it anymore. 3 months of living across the hall from Randy Thompson, and the man had never once looked her in the eye. He crossed the street when he saw her coming. He took the stairs when she waited for the elevator. He treated her like she was invisible, or worse, like she was something to escape from. So when Cara Castillo spotted him walking toward his apartment that Tuesday evening, she stepped directly into his path. "Why do you keep avoiding me?" Randy stopped. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "Because looking at you hurts." Cara stood frozen in the hallway, Randy's words still hanging in the air between them. He had already turned away, his key sliding into the lock of his apartment door. The click of the deadbolt echoed through the empty corridor like a verdict. Because looking at you hurts. She wanted to chase after him to demand an explanation, but her legs wouldn't move. Instead, she pressed her back against the wall and let the tears fall not from anger, but from something she hadn't expected. In 3 months of living across from this man, he was the first person to speak her sister's memory into existence without even saying her name. Cara had moved into this building on purpose. She had spent nearly 2 years searching for Randy Thompson, the EMT whose voice had been the last thing her sister Sophia ever heard. The accident report listed his name. The hospital records confirmed he had been first on scene. But finding him had taken time, patience, and a kind of quiet determination that bordered on obsession. She hadn't come to blame him. She had come to understand. Sophia Castillo had died on a rainy October night, trapped in her car after a delivery truck ran a red light. The impact had crushed the driver's side door. By the time emergency services arrived, she was bleeding internally. Her ribs fractured her lungs, filling with fluid. The firefighters needed 11 minutes to cut through the wreckage. Sophia didn't have 11 minutes, but she had Randy. According to the report, he had crawled partially into the vehicle, held her hand, and talked to her the entire time. He had kept her conscious. He had kept her calm. And when her heart finally gave out, he was still holding on. Cara had read that report so many times the paper had worn thin at the creases. She had memorized every clinical detail, every timestamp, every name. But reports didn't tell her what Sophia had said in those final moments. Reports didn't tell her if her sister had been afraid or peaceful or thinking of home. Only Randy could tell her that. So she had found his address, discovered the apartment across the hall was available, and signed a lease. She told herself she would introduce herself, slowly build trust, and eventually ask him about that night. She never expected him to recognize her face before she even had the chance. Now, standing alone in the hallway with mascara running down her cheeks, Cara realized something she hadn't considered. She looked like Sophia. Same dark hair, same brown eyes, same way of tilting her head when she listened. Growing up, people had often mistaken them for twins, even though Sophia was 4 years older. For Randy, seeing Cara every day must have been like seeing a ghost. Inside his apartment, Randy leaned against the closed door and pressed his palms against his eyes. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. He hadn't meant to say those words out loud. He had spent 3 months perfecting the art of avoidance, 3 months of taking the stairs, leaving early, coming home late, all to escape the woman who wore his worst memory on her face. "Dad?" Randy looked up. His son Isaiah stood in the hallway leading to the bedrooms, wearing his favorite Spider-Man pajamas and holding a half-eaten apple. At 8 years old, the boy had his mother's gentle eyes and his father's stubborn chin. He was the reason Randy got up every morning. The reason he hadn't fallen apart completely after Diane passed away when Isaiah was just 2. "Hey, buddy." Randy forced his voice steady. "What are you doing up?" "I heard the door." Isaiah took another bite of his apple. "Are you okay?" "You look weird." Randy almost laughed. Kids had no filter, which meant they were almost always honest. He crossed the room and crouched down to Isaiah's level, smoothing a hand over the boy's curly hair. "I'm fine. Just tired. Long shift." Isaiah studied his father's face with the kind of scrutiny that made Randy uncomfortable. The boy was too perceptive for his own good. "Did something happen with the nice lady?" Randy's stomach dropped. "What nice lady?" "The one across the hall, Miss Kara. She always smiles at me in the elevator." Isaiah shrugged. "You never smile back at her? It's kind of rude, Dad." Randy closed his eyes. His son had noticed. Of course his son had noticed. "It's complicated, buddy." "That's what you always say when you don't want to explain something." "Because some things are hard to explain." Isaiah considered this for a moment. Then he held out his apple. "Want a bite?" Despite everything, Randy smiled. He took the apple and bit into it, the sweetness cutting through the bitterness in his mouth. "Thanks, kid. Now go to bed. School tomorrow." Isaiah nodded and padded back toward his room. At the doorway, he turned around. "Dad, you always told me that when something's hard, you should talk about it instead of keeping it inside. Maybe you should talk to Miss Kara. She seems nice." Before Randy could respond, the boy disappeared into his room. Randy sat down heavily on the couch, still holding the apple, and stared at the wall. His son was right. He knew his son was right. But knowing something and doing something about it were two very different things. The next morning, Randy left for his shift at 4:30 long before Kara would be awake. He worked 12 hours at the station responding to calls, stabilizing patients, delivering people to emergency rooms where other professionals took over. It was the job he had trained for, the job he loved, the job that had slowly been destroying him from the inside out. When he got home that evening, there was an envelope taped to his door. No name on the front, no return address, just a plain white envelope with a slight bulge in the middle. Randy knew who it was from before he even opened it. He stood in the hallway for a long moment weighing his options. He could throw it away. He could pretend he never saw it. He could continue running the way he had been running for 2 years. Instead, he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded around a small photograph. The photo showed 2 young women at a graduation ceremony, both smiling, both wearing matching silver necklaces. One of them was Kara, younger, brighter, with hope written across her entire face. The other was Sophia. Randy recognized her instantly. The dark hair, the warm eyes, the gentle smile that had flickered in and out of consciousness while he held her hand in that crushed car rain pouring through the shattered windshield sirens wailing in the distance. He unfolded the paper. The handwriting was neat, careful, like someone had taken time choosing each word. "I didn't come here by accident. I've been looking for you for 2 years. Not to blame you, not to demand answers. I just wanted to meet the person who was with my sister at the end. I want to know what she said. I want to know if she was scared. I want to know if she knew she was loved. Please, I need to know. And I think maybe you need to tell someone. Kara." Randy read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and sat down on the floor of the hallway, his back against his apartment door. He stayed there for almost an hour. When Isaiah found him later sitting at the kitchen table with the photograph in his hands, the boy didn't ask questions. He just climbed onto the chair next to his father and leaned against his shoulder. "Is that the lady from across the hall?" Randy nodded slowly. "And her sister?" "She looks nice too." "The sister." "She was?" Randy's voice cracked on the words. "She was very nice." Isaiah looked up at his father's face, reading the grief there with a child's intuitive understanding. "Is that why you're sad, because you miss her?" Randy wanted to lie. He wanted to protect his son from the weight he carried, the guilt, the helplessness, the memory of watching someone die while being completely powerless to stop it. But Isaiah deserved better than lies. "I didn't know her very well," he said finally, "but I was there when she died. And I couldn't save her. And sometimes, buddy, that's the hardest thing in the world, trying your best and still not being enough." Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. Then he wrapped his small arms around his father's waist and squeezed tight. "You're always enough for me, Dad." Randy pulled his son close and held on the photograph still pressed between his fingers. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the apartment windows. Across the hall, Kara was probably waiting for a response that might never come. But for the first time in 2 years, Randy was beginning to think that maybe running wasn't the answer. Maybe it never had been. 3 days passed after Randy read Kara's letter. 3 days of silence, of avoiding her even more deliberately than before, of taking routes through the building he had never used. He started using the service elevator near the back stairwell. He timed his departures to the minute tracking when Kara typically left for work so he could slip out 15 minutes earlier. Isaiah noticed. The boy always noticed. "Dad, why are we leaving so early? The sun isn't even all the way up yet." Randy adjusted his son's backpack straps and guided him toward the back exit. "Just trying something new, buddy. Change of scenery." "But this way smells like garbage." He wasn't wrong. The service corridor ran past the building's waste disposal area, and the scent of rotting food hung in the air like a permanent resident. Randy wrinkled his nose but kept walking. Sometimes the scenic route isn't the prettiest one. Isaiah gave him a look that suggested he wasn't buying it. But he followed anyway the way he always did, trusting his father, even when his father's decisions made no sense. At work, Randy threw himself into his shifts with a focus that bordered on obsession. He volunteered for extra calls, stayed late to restock the ambulance-organized supply closets that didn't need organizing. His partner, a veteran EMT named Dwight, finally cornered him in the break room on the 4th day. "All right, Thompson, spill it." Randy looked up from his cold coffee. "Spill what? Whatever's eating you alive." Dwight sat down across from him, his large frame making the plastic chair creak in protest. "You've been wound tighter than a spring all week, and you keep checking your phone like you're waiting for a bomb to go off." Randy shook his head. "It's nothing. Personal stuff." "Personal stuff is exactly the kind of stuff that gets people killed in this job. You lose focus out there, you make mistakes. You make mistakes, people die." Dwight's voice was gentle despite the harsh words. "Talk to me, man. That's what partners are for." For a moment, Randy considered telling him everything. About Kara, about Sophia, about the letter that was still sitting in his jacket pocket because he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. But the words stuck in his throat the same way they always did when the subject of that night came up. "I appreciate it, Dwight. I really do. But this is something I need to figure out on my own." Dwight studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But my door's open. Whenever you're ready." That night, Randy stood outside Kara's apartment for almost 10 minutes before he finally knocked. His heart was hammering against his ribs. His palms were slick with sweat. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say a dozen times on the drive home, but now every word had evaporated from his mind. The door opened, and Kara stood there, in a simple gray sweater and jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked surprised to see him, then cautious, then something softer that he couldn't quite name. "Randy, can I come in?" She stepped aside without a word, and he entered her apartment for the first time. It was smaller than his, decorated simply but warmly. A few plants on the windowsill, a bookshelf overflowing with paperbacks. And on the wall beside the couch, a framed photograph of 2 young women at a graduation ceremony. The same photograph she had included in her letter. Randy stood in front of it, unable to look away. Sophia's smile seemed to reach through the glass, through time itself, pulling him back to that rain-soaked night when he had watched that same smile fade into nothing. That was the day she got her nursing degree. Kara's voice came from behind him. She had just turned 30. She was so proud. She kept saying she was finally going to help people the way she always wanted to. Randy closed his eyes. The irony wasn't lost on him. A woman who wanted to save lives killed by a driver who ran a red light. "Why did you really come here, Kara? Why did you spend 2 years looking for me?" She sat down on the couch and folded her hands in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but he could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. Because I needed to know she wasn't alone. The police report said you were with her. The hospital records said you held her hand. But none of that tells me what mattered. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. Was she scared? Did she suffer? Did she know that someone cared? Randy turned away from the photograph and sat down in the chair across from her. The distance between them felt both too far and too close. She was scared at first, he said finally. When I got to her, she was crying. The pain was bad. I could see it in her face, but I talked to her. I told her help was coming, that she just needed to hold on a little longer. Kara pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling over her cheeks. She asked me about my job, Randy continued, his voice rough. She wanted to know how I got into emergency medicine. I told her about my son, about how being a father made me want to do something that mattered. She liked that. She said she understood. He stopped gathering himself. The memories were rushing back now, vivid and sharp, the way they always did when he let his guard down. And then she talked about you? Kara's breath caught. Me? She said she had a little sister who was graduating from college that spring. She was so proud of you. She kept saying she was sorry she was going to miss it. Randy's voice broke on the last word. She made me promise to tell you something. But I never did. I couldn't find you. And then I tried to forget, because remembering hurt too much. What did she say? Kara whispered. Randy looked at her directly for the first time since entering the apartment. She said, "Tell my sister I'm sorry I couldn't make it to her graduation. Tell her she was always the brave one, not me." The sound that came from Kara was somewhere between a sob and a gasp. She covered her face with both hands, her shoulders shaking. Randy wanted to reach out to her to offer some kind of comfort, but he didn't know how. He had spent so long avoiding this moment that he had never considered what would happen when it finally arrived. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound Kara's quiet crying and the distant hum of traffic outside the window. Finally, she lowered her hands and looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Thank you for staying with her, for holding her hand, for making sure she wasn't alone." Randy shook his head. "I didn't do anything. I couldn't save her. You did everything." Kara's voice was fierce now, cutting through his self-doubt like a blade. "You gave her 11 minutes of human connection when she needed it most. You made sure her last moments weren't spent in terror and isolation. That matters, Randy. That matters more than you know." He wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to believe her. But the guilt was a weight he had carried for so long that he didn't know how to put it down. Over the next few weeks, something shifted between them. Randy stopped taking the service elevator. He stopped timing his departures to avoid her. When they passed in the hallway, he would nod, and she would nod back. It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was something. An acknowledgement, a tentative peace. Isaiah noticed the change, too. "You said hi to Miss Kara today," he observed one evening while they were eating dinner. "You never say hi to Miss Kara." "I'm trying to be more neighborly." "What's neighborly mean?" "It means being nice to the people who live near you." Isaiah considered this while chewing a mouthful of spaghetti. "Can she come over for dinner sometime? She always looks lonely." Randy set down his fork. "What makes you think she's lonely?" "She never has visitors, and sometimes I see her sitting on her balcony by herself just staring at the sky." The boy shrugged. "That's what lonely people do in movies." The observation hit Randy harder than he expected. He had been so focused on his own pain that he hadn't considered Kara's. She had lost her sister. She had spent 2 years searching for answers. And now she was living alone in an apartment across from a man who had spent months treating her like a pariah. "Maybe someday, buddy. We'll see." But fate had other plans. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. Randy was on the balcony reading a book while Isaiah played video games inside. Kara was on her own balcony watering her plants. They had exchanged brief waves earlier, nothing more. Then Isaiah appeared at the balcony door, his face troubled. "Dad, who's Sophia?" Randy's blood went cold. "What? I heard you talking to Miss Kara the other night. Through the wall. You said Sophia's name a lot. And Miss Kara was crying." Isaiah's brow furrowed with concern. "Did someone die? Is that why you're always sad?" Randy set down his book slowly, his mind racing. He had thought Isaiah was asleep during that conversation. He had thought the walls were thick enough to muffle their voices. He had been wrong on both counts. "Come here, buddy." Isaiah walked over and sat down next to his father. His eyes were wide, searching the way they always were when he sensed something important was happening. "Sophia was Miss Kara's sister," Randy said carefully. "She died 2 years ago in a car accident. I was the person who tried to help her." "You mean like when you help people at work?" "Exactly like that. Sometimes I can help them, and sometimes I can't." Randy took a deep breath. "Sophia was someone I couldn't help. And that's been very hard for me. It's been hard for Miss Kara, too." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he asked the question Randy had been dreading. "Did you hurt her? Is that why you feel bad?" "No, buddy. I didn't hurt her. I tried to save her. I did everything I could. But sometimes our best isn't enough. Sometimes people die even when we do everything right. That's not fair." "No, it's not fair. But that's how life works sometimes." Isaiah leaned against his father's shoulder the same way he had done in the kitchen weeks ago. "Is that why you've been avoiding Miss Kara? Because seeing her makes you think about Sophia?" The boy's perception was almost frightening. Randy nodded slowly. "She looks just like her sister. When I see Kara's face, I see Sophia's face. And I remember that night, and I remember failing, and it hurts. But you didn't fail, Dad. You tried. That's what matters." Isaiah looked up at him with absolute certainty. "You always tell me that trying is what counts, even if you lose." Randy pulled his son close, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. This 8-year-old boy with his favorite pajamas and his simple, unshakable faith understood something that Randy had been struggling to grasp for 2 years. Trying was what counted, even if you lost. But understanding it and believing it were 2 different things. And that night alone in his bedroom while Isaiah slept, Randy made a decision that felt like the only option left. He started packing boxes. He couldn't stay here. Every time he saw Kara, every time he heard her voice through the wall, every time Isaiah asked another innocent question that ripped open old wounds, the pain grew worse. He had thought facing the truth would bring closure. Instead, it had only reminded him of everything he had lost. The next morning, he told Kara. They stood in the hallway, Randy with his hands in his pockets, Kara with confusion written across her face. "You're leaving?" "I have to. For Isaiah's sake. For my own sake." He couldn't meet her eyes. "Every time I see you, I see her. And every time Isaiah sees me falling apart, I'm failing him as a father. Randy running away isn't going to fix anything. Maybe not. But staying is killing me." Kara's expression shifted from confusion to something harder, something that looked almost like anger. "You're not running from me," she said quietly. "You're running from yourself. And you can move to the other side of the country, but that won't change anything. You'll still carry her with you. You'll still blame yourself for something that wasn't your fault." Randy finally looked at her. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her jaw was set with determination. "I watched my sister die without being there," she continued. "I spent 2 years haunted by questions I couldn't answer. And then I found you and I finally got some peace. But you're still trapped in that car with her, aren't you? You never left." The words hit him like a physical blow, because she was right. 2 years later, and he was still holding Sophia's hand in that crushed vehicle, still watching the light fade from her eyes, still whispering promises he couldn't keep. I don't know how to let go, he admitted. Maybe you don't have to let go. Maybe you just have to stop carrying it alone. She reached out and touched his arm, the first physical contact they had ever shared. Her hand was warm, gentle, nothing like the cold grip of a dying woman. Don't leave, she said. Not like this. Not because you're scared. Randy looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face so much like Sophia's, and yet so completely her own. He didn't answer, but that night he unpacked the boxes. The unpacked boxes sat in the corner of Randy's living room for 3 days. He walked past them every morning, every evening, a reminder of the decision he had almost made and the one he was still trying to understand. Isaiah found him staring at them on the 4th night. Dad, are we still moving? Randy turned to see his son standing in the doorway, wearing those same Spider-Man pajamas, his face creased with worry. The boy had been quieter than usual all week, tiptoeing around the apartment like he was afraid of disturbing something fragile. No, buddy, we're not moving. Promise. The word hung in the air between them. Randy thought about all the promises he had made in his life, the ones he had kept, and the ones he had broken. He thought about the promise he had made to Sophia, the one about telling Kara she was the brave one. It had taken him 2 years to keep that promise, but he had kept it. Promise, he said. Isaiah's face relaxed into relief. He crossed the room and climbed onto the couch next to his father, tucking himself under Randy's arm with the ease of long practice. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. You said trying is what counts even if you lose. But what happens when you're too scared to try? Randy looked down at his son, surprised by the question. What do you mean? Like with Miss Kara. You were scared to talk to her, right, because of Sophia. But then you did it anyway, and now you're not as sad anymore. Isaiah tilted his head, thinking. So maybe being scared is okay as long as you still try. The simplicity of it struck Randy like sunlight breaking through clouds. His 8-year-old son, with his video games and his endless questions, had just summarized 2 years of struggle in a single sentence. Being scared is okay as long as you still try. When did you get so smart? Randy asked. I learned from you. Isaiah grinned. Also from cartoons. They have good lessons sometimes. Randy laughed, the sound surprising him. It had been a long time since he had laughed like that without reservation, without the weight of grief pressing down on his chest. You're right, he said. Being scared is okay, and I think I've been scared for too long. The next evening, Randy knocked on Kara's door again. This time his hands weren't shaking. This time he knew exactly what he wanted to say. She opened the door with a cautious expression that softened when she saw his face. Something had changed in him, and she could tell. Can I come in? She stepped aside, and he entered her apartment for the second time. The graduation photograph was still on the wall, Sophia's smile still reaching through the glass. But this time, Randy didn't flinch when he looked at it. I've been thinking about what you said, he began. About carrying things alone. About not letting go, but not running either. Kara sat down on the couch watching him with those dark eyes that were so like her sister's and yet entirely her own. I've saved 47 people in my career, Randy continued. 47 lives that might have ended without me. But I don't remember most of them. I don't remember their faces, their names, their stories. The ones I remember are the ones I lost. He moved to sit in the chair across from her, the same chair he had sat in weeks ago, when he first told her about Sophia's final moments. Your sister was the first person who died while I was holding their hand. Not the first I lost on a call, but the first where I was right there looking into their eyes, watching the light go out. And I couldn't let go. Not of her hand, not of that night, not of the feeling that I should have done more. Kara's eyes glistened, but she didn't interrupt. I told Isaiah about it. About Sophia, about what happened. He asked me if I had hurt her, and I told him no. I told him I had tried my best, and he said, that's what matters. Trying. Randy's voice cracked slightly. An 8-year-old understood something that took me 2 years to figure out. What's that? Kara asked softly. That failing doesn't mean I didn't matter. That being there even when I couldn't change the outcome was still something. Sophia wasn't alone because of me. She knew someone cared because of me. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Kara reached out and took his hand the same way she had touched his arm in the hallway days before. But this time, Randy didn't pull away. It's more than enough, she said. It's everything. They talked for hours that night. Not about Sophia, not about grief, but about their lives. Kara told him about growing up in New Mexico, about how Sophia had practically raised her after their mother left. Randy told her about Diane, about becoming a single father, about the terror and joy of watching Isaiah grow up. They discovered they both loved bad action movies and hated cilantro. They laughed at the same jokes. They finished each other's sentences without realizing it. By the time Randy left, the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. He stood in her doorway, reluctant to go, feeling like something fundamental had shifted between them. Thank you, he said, for finding me, for not giving up. Kara smiled, and for the first time, Randy could see her face without seeing her sister's ghost behind it. She was Kara. Just Kara. And that was more than enough. Thank you for staying, she replied. Months passed. Seasons changed. The anniversary of Sophia's death came and went, marked not with isolation and silence, but with Kara, Randy, and Isaiah visiting her grave together. Kara brought flowers. Randy brought a small card he had written the night before, words he should have said 2 years ago. I kept my promise, he said quietly, kneeling beside the headstone. I told your sister what you wanted her to know, and I think she turned out pretty brave after all. Isaiah stood beside him, holding Kara's hand, watching his father with solemn understanding. Is this Sophia? The boy asked. Yes, buddy. This is Sophia. She was the one you tried to save. Yes. She was the one I tried to save. Isaiah thought about this for a moment. Then he let go of Kara's hand and crouched down next to his father. Hi, Sophia, he said to the headstone. I'm Isaiah. I'm 8. My dad talks about you sometimes. He was really sad for a long time, but he's better now. Your sister is really nice. She makes good cookies. Kara laughed through her tears, and Randy felt something loosen in his chest, a knot that had been tied for so long, he had forgotten it was there. That evening, they had dinner at Randy's apartment. Isaiah had insisted on helping cook, which meant there was flour everywhere, and the spaghetti was slightly overcooked, but no one complained. They ate together at the small kitchen table, the three of them like a family that had somehow found its way to each other through grief and loss and stubborn hope. After Isaiah went to bed, Randy and Kara sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker below. The same balconies where they had once exchanged awkward waves, where Isaiah had observed that Miss Kara looked lonely. You know, Kara said, I thought finding you would give me closure. I thought once I knew what happened to Sophia, I could finally move on. Did it? She shook her head slowly. It gave me something better. It gave me connection. It reminded me that grief doesn't have to be a wall. Sometimes it can be a bridge. Randy looked at her, this woman who had traveled 2 years and countless miles to find him, who had moved into an apartment across the hall just to understand her sister's final moments. She had come seeking answers and had found something neither of them expected. Looking at you still hurts, he said softly. Kara's expression flickered with surprise, then something deeper. I know, she said, but it's different now. It's not the kind of hurt that makes me want to run. It's the kind that reminds me I'm still here, still feeling, still alive. He reached over and took her hand. Sophia told me you were the brave one. I think she was right. Kara squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with tears that didn't fall. I think maybe we're both learning how to be brave." Inside the apartment, Isaiah's nightlight glowed through the window, a small beacon of warmth in the darkness. Randy thought about his son, about the simple wisdom the boy had offered without even knowing it. Being scared is okay as long as you still try. He had tried. They all had. And somehow, against all odds, they had found their way to something that felt like healing. 1 year later, the photograph of Sophia still hung on Kara's wall. But now there was another photograph beside it, one taken at Isaiah's 9th birthday party. In it, Randy and Kara stood on either side of the boy, all three of them covered in frosting from a cake fight that had gotten out of hand. They were laughing genuinely, laughing the kind of laughter that comes from deep contentment. Randy looked at both photographs every time he visited Kara's apartment. The sister she had lost, the family they were building, 2 images side by side, grief and joy holding hands. "You okay?" Kara asked one evening, noticing him standing in front of the photographs. "More than okay," he said. "I was just thinking." "About what?" He turned to face her, this woman who had come into his life through tragedy and stayed through choice. About how sometimes the people who hurt us the most aren't the ones who do us harm. They're the ones who remind us that we're still capable of feeling. He pulled her close. "You reminded me of that. You and Isaiah both." Kara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Sophia would have liked you," she said. "I like to think she sent you to me. Her way of making sure I didn't give up." They stood there in the quiet apartment, 2 people who had found each other through loss, who had built something new from the ruins of grief. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, Isaiah was playing video games, his occasional shouts of triumph punctuating the silence. Randy thought about the question Kara had asked him in the hallway all those months ago. "Why do you keep avoiding me?" He had answered with 5 words that had changed everything. "Because looking at you hurts." But now looking at her didn't hurt. Or rather it did, but in the way that stretching a muscle hurts, the kind of pain that comes from growth, the kind that reminds you that you're healing. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most aren't the ones who cause us harm. They're the ones who remind us that we're still capable of love, of connection, of feeling deeply enough to risk being broken again. And sometimes, if we're brave enough to stay instead of run, that pain transforms into something beautiful, something worth holding on to. If this story touched your heart, I'd love for you to subscribe and join our community. We share stories like this every week, stories about real emotions, real struggles, and the quiet moments that change everything. And I'm curious, have you ever avoided someone not because they hurt you, but because they reminded you of something you weren't ready to face? Or maybe you've been on the other side wondering why someone kept their distance when you'd done nothing wrong. Whatever your experience, I'd love to hear it. Drop a comment below and share your story. You never know who might need to read it today.